Hi, my friends. Good morning to you. We're continuing on our reading of the Spirit's book, and we're going to talk about the topic of chapter 3, diversity of human races, and continue with the questions to the spirits. Question 52. Where did the physical and moral differences that distinguish the Earth's various races come from? And then the spirit answers, from climate, lifestyle, and custom. The same would happen if two siblings from the same mother were each raised differently and far apart. They would show no moral resemblance to each other. And then question 53. Did humankind first appear at various points on the globe? And then the spirit answers, yes, but at different periods, which is another cause of human race diversity. Later, humankind spread throughout the different climatic zones, and new types arose in the course of interbreeding between different races. And the question follows, do these different races imply distinct species? And then the spirit answers, certainly not. All are of the same family. Do the different varieties of the same fruit mean that they do not all belong to the same species? Question 54. Since the various human types have not all come from the same ancestor, mightn't they cease to regard one another as brothers and sisters? And then the spirit answers, all are brothers and sisters in God because they are animated by the same spirit and strive towards the same goal. You always want to take words literally. And then comes the following topic of the questions. Plurality, the plurality of worlds. Question 55. Are all the globes spinning through space inhabited? And then the spirit answers, yes, and contrary to what earthlings believe, they themselves are far from being first in intelligence, goodness, and perfection. Nevertheless, there are individuals who think they know the whole truth of the matter and imagine that this little planet is the only one privileged enough to be inhabited by reasoning beings. Pride and vanity. They fancy that God has created the universe only for earthlings. And then there is a note from the author saying, God has populated all worlds with living beings, all working toward the final objective of providence. To believe that living beings are limited only to their own particular spot in the universe is to doubt the wisdom of God. However, God has never made anything without a purpose and must have intended these worlds to fulfill a more important role than simply entertaining our eyes. Moreover, there is nothing in the Earth's position, size, or composition that could reasonably support the notion that, to the exclusion of many thousands of similar worlds, it alone is privileged with being inhabited. Question 56. Is the physical composition of all the different globes the same? And then the spirit answers, no, they do not resemble one another at all. And then question 57. Since the physical composition of all the various worlds is not the same, do the beings inhabiting them have a different physical organization? The spirit answers, yes, of course. Just as on yours, fish are made for living in the water and birds for living in the air. Question 58. Do the worlds furthest from the sun lack light and heat, since the sun would appear only as a distant star to them? Spirit answers, do you believe that the sun is the only source of light and heat? What about electricity? On some worlds, electricity plays a role unknown to you, which is much more important than the role it plays on Earth. Besides, we have never said that all beings are made of the same matter as you, with organs similar to yours. And then the author makes a note. The existence of beings on the various worlds depends on the appropriate environmental conditions in which they are intended to live. If we had never seen fish, we would not understand how certain beings could live in water. The same applies to other worlds which no doubt contains elements unknown to us. On the earth itself, do we not see the long polar nights being illuminated by electricity of the aurora borealis? On other worlds, it is not possible that electricity is more abundant than on ours and performs a general role with effects we cannot comprehend. Hence, it could well be that those worlds self-contain the light and heat sources required by their inhabitants. And then there is another topic called Biblical Considerations and Account Concerning the Creation. Question 59. Cultures have held widely differing ideas about creation, according to their degree of understanding. With the support of science, reason has recognized the improbability of some of these theories. However, the one given by the spirits confirms the opinion long acknowledged by more enlightened individuals. The objection to such a theory is that it seems to contradict the sacred texts. But a serious examination will lead to the realization that this contradiction is more apparent than real, and that it results from the way an allegorical meaning is interpreted. The issue of the first man personified in Adam as being the exclusive progenitor of humankind is not the only religious belief that has had to be modified. At one time, the movement of the earth around the sun appeared so contrary to the scriptures that all kinds of persecutions were carried out under such a pretext. Nevertheless, the earth continued to move despite the anathemas, and no one today would dispute it without insulting reason itself. The Bible also tells us that the world was created in 6 days, and it establishes the time of its creation at about 4,000 years before the Christian era. Before then, the earth did not exist at all. It was created out of nothing. It is a solemn text, yet physical science, inexorable science, has proven the contrary. Earth's formation is indelibly written in the fossil record, and it has been proven that the 6 days of creation represents successive periods, each lasting perhaps many hundreds of thousands of years. This is not a theory, a doctrine, or an isolated opinion. It is a fact as solid as it is the movement of the earth around the sun, and a fact that theology can no longer refuse to accept. And it demonstrates the error that one can fall into by attributing literal truth to often figurative language. Should we thus conclude that the Bible is in error? No, rather, people err in the way they interpret it. In excavating Earth's archives, science has discovered the order in which different living beings have appeared on its surface, and this order is in agreement with the one indicated in Genesis. The difference, however, is that instead of having issued miraculously from the hand of God in words in only a few hours, the work of creation did indeed occur according to God's will, but through the laws of natural forces over millions of years. But does that make God any less great and powerful? Is the sublimity of God's work lost because it did not appear instantaneously? Of course not. We would have to have a petty idea about the divinity not to recognize the divine omnipotence in the eternal laws established to govern the world. Far from diminishing the divine work, science shows it to us under a more magnificent aspect that better conforms to our notions of God's power and majesty, precisely because the work was done without disregard for the laws of nature. Science places humankind last in the order of the creation of living beings and is in tandem the Mosaic record on this point. However, that record puts the universal flood at 1654 years after or 1654 years after the Earth's creation. Whereas geology shows us that this great cataclysm occurred before humankind even appeared. So far, no traces have been found in the primitive layers that would attest to the presence of humans or of animals which, from a physical standpoint at least, would be of the same category. However, nothing has actually proven this to be impossible. Since many discoveries have already raised questions about this issue, it is possible that at any moment the material certainty of the anteriority of the human race may come to light. In that case, as well as in others, the biblical text would be shown to portray an allegory. The actual issue lies in determining whether or not the geological cataclysm was the same as that of the Noah story. We know that the time needed to form the fossil layers does not allow any confusion. Therefore, as soon as any vestiges of human existence prior to the great catastrophe are found, it will be proven either that Adam was not the first man or that his creation has been lost in the night of time. There is no arguing against fact, and it would have to be accepted in the same way as the movement of the earth and the 6 days of creation. The existence of the human race prior to the geological flood is no doubt still hypothetical, but consider the following. Affirming that humans first appeared upon the earth 4,000 years before Christ, and if all of them except for a single family were wiped out 1,650 years later, then the entire current population of the earth must have originated from the time of Noah, in other words, 2,350 years before Christ. However, when the Hebrews immigrated to Egypt in the 18th century before Christ, they found a densely populated and highly civilized land. History also shows that at the time India and many other lands were flourishing as well, and this fact does not take into account the chronological tables of certain cultures that go back even further. Thus, it would have been necessary for the descendants of a single individual's family to have populated from the 24th to the 18th century, in other words, 600 years, all the vast regions that had been known about at the time, supposing that others had not been populated. It would also have been necessary for the human race during this brief period to have evolved from its primitive state of total ignorance to the highest degree of intellectual development. Both suppositions are in contradiction to all anthropological laws. Human race diversity supports this contradiction. Climate and customs undoubtedly produce modifications in physical characteristics, but these modifications can only be carried so far, and physiological examinations prove the existence among some races of constitutional differences more profound than could be produced by climate alone. The crossing of races produces intermediary types and tends to erase extreme characteristics. It does not produce these characteristics. However, it only creates varieties. Thus, for the crossing of races to have occurred, it would be necessary for there to have been distinct races in the first place. But how could there have been distinct races if they all came from one ancestor, and especially in such a short time? How could anyone believe that in only a few centuries, a few descendants of Noah had been transformed into the point of producing the Ethiopian race, for example? Such metamorphoses would be as unlikely as the theory of a common origin for wolves and sheep, aphids and elephants, or birds and fish. Once more, nothing can prevail against the factual evidence. On the other hand, everything can be explained if we admit that humans existed prior to the time commonly assigned to their appearance, that their origins were diverse, that Adam, who lived 6,000 years ago, populated an uninhabited region, that Noah's flood was a localized catastrophe rather than the great geological cataclysm, and finally, that we take into account the allegorical form characteristic of the Oriental style, which can be found in all the sacred books of every culture. That is why it is prudent not to lightly accuse as erroneous those doctrines which, like so many others, could someday enjoy a retraction from individuals who currently oppose them. Rather than being lost, religious ideas become even greater when they march in step with science. This is the only way to keep from being vulnerable to skepticism. Well, guys, this was the chapter 3, the end of chapter 3. I hope you have liked as much as I did. And I leave you now. God bless you. Big kiss. See you next time. Bye-bye.